Hi everyone, Kennedy here from the Ornament Girl, and today I'll be showing you how to create the quick and fun infinity ornament pattern. Welcome to the Ornament Girl, where we love sharing tips, tricks, and patterns for creating beautiful, no-sew quilted ornaments all year long. The infinity ornament pattern was designed by Sherry, one of our designers here at the Ornament Girl, and it's created on a square piece of foam, so it's really easy to create an ornament that will stand and sit on its own as a sit-about tabletop decoration, or you can add a hanger to the top so that you have a perfect way to hang the ornament as well. There are lots of different color combinations and placements that you can choose for your different fabric colors, so be sure to check out the free printable coloring sheet that we've included with the pattern. You can click the link below the video to download your planning sheet, print it out, and color it in to plan out the placement for your ornament fabrics. This ornament pattern also creates a great snow globe effect if you have fabrics with a larger print that you'd like to show as a fussy cut at the center. So if you'd like us to make a video showing how to make this snow globe version of the infinity pattern, be sure to let us know in the comments below. In order to create the infinity ornament, you will need a soft foam cube. I'm using a cube that measures 3 by 3 by 2 inches from the Ornament Girl supply shop, satin straight pins, fabric, embellishments, and a few ornament making tools. Be sure to check out the link below the video to download the free printable supply list that we've included with the pattern, which will give you all of the correct quantities and measurements for all of the materials that you'll need. A quick tip about your fabrics: fabric number 1 will be used the most on the ornament, so it will be recurring throughout the pattern. On this ornament here, the floral fabric is my fabric number 1, and then fabric number 2, 3, and 4 will each be used one time. Fabric number 2 will be closest to the center, fabric number 3 will be near the middle, and fabric number 4 will create these corners outlining the entire ornament. Again, you can use that printable planning sheet we've included to help plan out the orders of your fabrics as well. Once all of your tools and materials are gathered, we can begin creating your infinity ornament. Before we add any fabric to the ornament, we are first going to make a few marks on the foam. So for this, you will want a pen, a flexible tape measure, and then something you can use to score lines into the soft foam. I'm using an Ornament Girl tucking tool here, but you can use something similar like a dull butter knife. Scoring the lines into the foam rather than drawing them will prevent any dark lines from showing through the fabric at the center of the ornament. The first thing we're going to do is find the center of each side. Now your cube should measure about 3 inches across, but it may not be absolutely perfect. My cube is not exactly on the dot at 3 inches. So what I'm going to do here is center the first 3 inches of my tape measure over the foam, which means the end of my tape measure and the 3-inch mark are extending equally to the left and the right of the edges of the foam. Now I'm just going to make a tiny mark at the 1.5-inch mark, and that should be the center of that side of the cube. And I'm going to repeat that for each of the 4 sides. So again, I'm making sure that the end of the tape measure and the 3-inch mark look like they're equal distances from the edges of the cube, and then making a mark at the 1.5-inch mark. And I'll do that for all 4 edges of the square. All right, now that I have those 4 little marks made, instead of drawing the lines to connect them, I'm using some light colored fabrics near the center of my ornament, so I don't want to risk the dark lines showing through. I'm going to score those lines instead. So using your flexible tape measure as a straight edge to connect 2 opposite marks across the foam, you can then use the flat side of your Ornament Girl tucking tool or something similar like a dull butter knife or the tip of a straight pin to just indent that line into the foam. So I'm just scoring that line so that I can see it, but it won't show through the fabric at the center. And now we're going to do the exact same thing to connect the 2 opposite marks. and then score that line. And now that we have the 4 marks made connecting the sides, we also want to make marks connecting the corners. So you're going to use the edge of your flexible tape measure to connect 2 opposite corners across the foam. Hold that tape measure in place and then use it as a straight edge to score a line connecting those 2 corners, and it should cross over the other lines right at the center point there, and then you'll do the same for the remaining set of opposite corners. Now you've added all of the necessary marks to side 1 of the foam. We have 2 lines crossing each other connecting the edges, and then another set of lines connecting the corners, and they all cross at the center point. Now flip the cube over and just take a moment to create those same 8 marks on the back side of the foam. Once you have created the indented lines on both sides of the soft foam cube, we're ready to add our fabric. The first thing that you want to do with your fabric pieces is lay them out in the order that they will be going on the ornament, because there are a lot of different fabric cuts and it's easy to get a little confused, so we just want to sort out that order now. First, you're going to take your fabric number 1 pieces and lay them out with the 1.5 inch pieces first, the 1.25 inch pieces next, and then the larger squares last. Those should be 2 inch squares. We're now going to fill in the layers that go between them. So we'll go fabric number 1 and then fabric number 2, which is also 1.25 inches, fabric number 1 again, then fabric number 3, which is 1.5 inches, fabric number 1 again, and then fabric number 4, which is 3 inches. So we have our 1.5 inch squares, 2 1.25 inch sets, 1.5, 2 inch, and 3 inches. So you have these laid out in the order you're going to use them. You can just push them upward and out of the way, but now you have them ready for placing on the ornament. Now the first piece of fabric that we're going to use is a 1.5 inch square of fabric number 1. Hold this square with the pattern side facing away from you and fold it in half from top to bottom, but you want to be careful not to crease the fold. You're just putting the raw edges together. Then fold it in half the opposite way, again doing your best not to crease the fold. The only point you want to crease is the corner where all of the folded edges meet up. So pinch the corner that's connected to all of the folded edges. Unfold, and now you should see a little creased point at the center of the square where we pinched that corner. You'll take one of your satin straight pins and pin directly at that center point down through the pattern side of the fabric. Now pin this at the center point of the cube, which is the point where all of these lines we created meet up at one point right in the center. And then you can just straighten your fabric out and smooth it out and pin it into the foam. You want to pin it in place at all 4 corners and all 4 sides. And you can stretch it a little bit to help it lie nice and smooth over the ornament, because we don't want the center of the ornament to be all rippled up. Once all 4 corners are pinned in place, you can pin the 4 edges down as well. Once that is pinned in place, the first square is complete, and now we need to place some marker pins. So you want to grab your flexible tape measure, and we're going to place 4 marker pins. They will be placed along the lines that intersect the edges of the cubes. So don't measure along the line that connects to the corner. You want to measure along the line that touches the edge of the cube. And I'm measuring from the edge of that center pin along one of those center lines. And you can place the marker pin along the line at the 3/8 inch mark. And a marker pin is temporary, so you only need to push it in about halfway. And now you will repeat that along each of those 4 lines. So I'm measuring from the edge of the pin out along the line, and you want to be consistent with your measuring techniques. So if you are measuring from the center of the pin, for example, make sure to do that along all 4 lines, because this is going to help us get our square started, and we want it to be as consistent as possible. So directly along the line, placing a marker pin at the 3/8 inch mark. I'll repeat that for the remaining 2 lines as well. Now you have the 4 marker pins placed around the center, and we can move on to fabric number 2. So you are going to need 4 squares of fabric number 2. I'm just going to pick out the 4 I'll need and then set the other 4 aside for side 2 of the ornament. Taking one of these squares, hold it with the pattern side facing away from you and fold it in half. So you're just putting the raw edges together and creasing the folded edge. Now lay this piece on the ornament with the folded edge just touching 2 of the marker pins. So it should be making a straight line connecting 2 marker pins and should sit about centered between them. And then you can pin in place at the top left and right corners, keeping the folded edge making a straight line that's sitting just against the marker pins. Now we're just going to do that 3 more times. So fold one of your squares in half with the pattern side facing outward. Moving to the right of the piece you just placed, you're going to set this against 2 marker pins, so it's going to start to overlap the previous piece, and that's totally okay. And then pin the corners in place. And you want to make sure that these pins you're placing sit well outside of the marker pins. You don't want to be pinning close to those marker pins. You want to be pinning outside of them, because that will help us make sure that the pins will be covered up in the next layer. Fold another square in half with the pattern side facing outward and use the folded edge to connect the next 2 marker pins. And pin in place. And then use the final square to complete the final edge of that inside square that we're outlining. And it's okay that it overlaps 2 pieces. You won't see these overlap points on the finished ornament, so we don't need to worry about keeping the overlapping pattern consistent. Now that you have all 4 pieces pinned in place, go ahead and remove the marker pins, and now you need to take a look at this center square and make sure it looks nice and even. If this center square is off, it's going to shift the squares for the entire rest of the ornament. So here I have a point that comes out a little further than it needs to. I'm just going to unpin that piece and shift it downward a little bit to help make a nice even square that has the 4 corners sitting along the lines that intersect the edges of the ornament. And you can turn it a few different ways, because that will help you see if the square looks even from all sides. So just take a minute to adjust anything that needs adjusted to get a nice even center square. And then once you're happy with the placement of those 4 pieces and the center square, you can remove the pin from the center. If it left a hole in the fabric, you can use the tip of the pin to scratch the fabric fibers back into place. And now we have layer 1 and layer 2 complete, and we're going to continue creating squares around the outside of the ornament. So now we're moving on to our 1 1/4 inch squares of fabric number 1. Again, you'll need 4 squares, and you can set aside the other 4 for side 2 of the ornament. Fold one of these squares in half with the pattern side facing outward and crease the top folded edge. Now you want to lay this on the ornament so that the top folded edge sits just against one of the corners from the square that you just created in the center. So we just outlined this square. You are going to lay this piece on the ornament so that the folded edge sits just against that corner. You don't want to overlap it, and you don't want space between the folded edge and the corner. You want them to just touch. And the top folded edge should create a straight line that runs parallel to the horizontal line on the ornament, and then pin in place at the top left and right corners. And these pins should sit outside of the corners from the center square, because that's how we know that they'll be covered with the pieces that we're about to add. So we've got that piece pinned in place. We can prep the next piece, folding it in half with the pattern side facing outward. Make sure you give that fold a nice crease. Now you are going to move to the right of the piece you just placed and lay this piece on the ornament, just touching that next corner from the center square, making sure that the top folded edge creates a line that is parallel with the line directly above it that we scored into the foam, and then pin those corners in place. So what we're doing here is creating a new square outline with the folded edges of these 4 pieces. So go ahead and repeat those exact same steps to add the next 2 pieces to the ornament. Once you've placed all 4 pieces, you want to look at the outline of this square you've just created and fix anything that needs fixed, because if anything is noticeably off now, it will definitely be noticeably off in the final ornament. So for example, my folded edge here is overlapping that corner a little bit too much. I'm just going to move it out a tiny bit to make sure that all of the corners from the center square are still showing. And repin everything. If you need to tug anything or fix anything, do that now. And with that, layer 3 is complete. Now for layer 4, we're just going to do the same thing, moving on to squares of fabric number 3. So you need 4 of those squares. Fold one in half with the pattern side facing outward. And now we're going to be working along the corners of the square we just created. So these corners are going to line up with the corners of the foam. You're going to lay your folded piece so that the top folded edge rests just against the corner of the square you created in the previous layer. And try to center it the best that you can, because we want these pins to sit outside of the corners of this square from the previous layer. That way we know they'll be hidden. And the top folded edge should create a straight line that runs parallel with the line on the foam directly above it. And remember, you don't want to overlap the corner, you just want the piece to sit right up against it. Go ahead and fold another square in half, and then lay that piece on the ornament so that it sits just against the corner of the square outline you created with the previous layer. Make sure your piece sits centered the best that you can. And then repeat that 2 more times to finish the outline of the square for this layer. Once you've added all 4 pieces, check to make sure that you've created a nice even square with nice even points and that nothing looks too off in the center there. If you need to adjust anything, you can do so now. And now, as you've probably guessed, we're going to do the same thing for the next layer. So now we're switching back to fabric number 1, this time using 2-inch squares. You need 4 of them. And you will fold this piece in half with the pattern side facing out. And then lay it on the ornament so that it sits just against the corner from the square outline that you created with the previous layer's folded edges. And the top folded edge should run parallel to the line directly above it. And pin in place at both corners. And again, you don't want to overlap those corners, you just want to barely touch them with the folded edge. And you are going to repeat that, so I'm going to fold my second piece here. And continue working my way around the ornament, creating a new square outline that sits just outside of the corners of the square outline from the previous layer. And as you can see, you could get really fun with your fabric placement here. You could do a gradient, you could do different stripes of different colors if you wanted to block them and do a couple layers in the same color. There are lots of different options for this ornament, so really be sure to take advantage of that planning sheet that we've included with the video as well. Go ahead and place the last 2 pieces just like you did in the previous layers. Once you've added all 4 pieces, of course, take a look at that center square and see if there is anything that needs adjusted so that the corners and sides look nice and even. And once you are happy with the placement, we just have one more layer left to add on this side, and that is going to be using fabric number 4. So you need 4 of those squares. And we're going to be placing them so that they also overlap the corners of the foam. Now, I like to add some marker pins. It's not totally necessary, but I do find that it helps to keep everything lined up. You want to place a marker pin right along the edge of the cube in line with the little halfway mark that you made when you were marking the foam. If you want to measure again to find the halfway mark, you can. I like to just use that halfway mark that I drew. So I'm just looking to make sure that my pin is sticking halfway out of the foam and it's in line with the halfway point of the edge of the cube. And this is just going to help us make sure that this final round of corners is even on all sides. So I have those pins sticking straight up, but they're just along the edges and they're at the halfway point of each side of the cube. Now fold one of your squares in half with the pattern side facing out. Even though these squares are a little bigger, we're going to prep them in the same way. Lay this on the ornament and it should be able to just touch the corner from the previous layer and sit just against the 2 marker pins that you placed in line with the top folded edge. So I'm making sure it just touches that corner. It's just touching the marker pin, and then you'll fold it over the edge of the cube and pin it in place on the side because we are going to cover these pins with the bands that we add around the outside. So I'm just doing the same thing on the left side. My folded edge is just touching the corner of the previous layer, and it's just touching these marker pins at the center of this side. Go ahead and fold another piece. And you're just going to do the same thing, laying the folded edge against the corner of that previous layer. Make sure the folded edge also just sits against the marker pins. And then fold the edges over the foam, over the edge of the foam, sorry, and pin them in place. And you want to make sure when you're pinning near the edge of a cube that you're angling your pins toward the center of the foam. You don't want to aim them toward the face because they could poke through this little corner and hurt you. So just make sure you're not angling your pins upward because you don't want them to poke through the front of your ornament. Go ahead and repeat those steps to add the final 2 pieces of fabric in the exact same way. Once all 4 of those pieces are placed, you can remove the marker pins and make sure that when you look at this outline you created, it looks like a nice even square. And once you're happy with the placement, we are then going to secure the pieces a little bit more. So without tugging the pieces out of place, you don't want to move the folded edge. Gently smooth the fabric down over the corner of the foam and add about 3 more pins to help secure it. We don't want it to be all bubbled up on the front, so we're going to use quite a few pins to hold down the fabric here. And you're going to do that for each loose end of these fabric pieces. I'm just working my way around, smoothing them down, and adding at least 3 pins to hold them in place. And you want these pins to sit about 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the cube. So just work your way around and continue securing these fabric pieces with a few extra pins without pulling the top folded edges out of place. Now that all of the sides of these fabric pieces are pinned down, we still have these loose corners to contend with. So I will show you how to get a nice finished corner at each corner of the foam. Pinch both sides of the fabric, so we have fabric to the left and the right of the corner. Pinch them together and then fold them down. And it does not matter if you fold them to the left or the right. You can fold them whichever direction helps it to lay more smooth. And again, you don't want to tug that folded edge out of place. You're just going to pinch, fold, and then pin that corner in place so that when you're looking at the ornament from the front, you have a nice mitered finish. So go ahead and pinch, fold, and pin each of the 4 fabric corners. And now all that's left to do for side 1 is trim away this extra fabric. So you can take your fabric scissors and just carefully trim away the fabric extending beyond that pin line that you created. The trimming does not have to look perfect. We're going to cover all of these raw edges with some bands when we are finished, but you do just want to trim away the extra fabric to help reduce bulk on the finished ornament. So you're just going to trim away those extra bits. And just like that, you've completed side 1 of your infinity ornament, and you can see how beautifully all these squares work together. Now to complete side 2, we are going to flip the ornament over and complete the exact same steps. To help the video move along a little faster for you guys, I won't give you as much of a breakdown of every piece. I'll probably skip ahead a little bit more. But if you find yourself wanting the more step-by-step instructions for each layer, you can rewind the video to layer 1 and start there and just repeat the same steps on side 2. But if you just want a quick refresher on how to do each layer, I will go ahead and speed that up a little bit for this second half. Layer 1 is made up of the 1.5 inch square of fabric number 1. Hold this with the pattern side facing away from you and fold it in half twice without creasing the folds, and you just want to pinch the little point where all of the folded edges meet up. open that square up and pin down through the creased center point directly into the pattern side, and flip the ornament over so we are working on side 2 now. Pin that directly into the center point where all of the lines meet up. Once it is pinned down into the center, just take a moment to smooth the fabric over the foam and pin it in place along all 4 corners and all 4 edges. Once layer 1 is pinned in place, you are going to place 4 marker pins. These will be placed along the lines that extend out from the center and run into the edge of the cube. You're not measuring along the corner lines, you're measuring along the lines that are perpendicular to the sides, and placing a marker pin at the 3/8 inch mark along each of those 4 lines. Once you have placed all 4 marker pins, you are going to use your remaining 4 squares of fabric number 2 to create the next layer. So just like we did on side 1, fold one of these squares in half with the pattern side facing outward. Lay it against 2 marker pins, creating a straight line with the folded edge sitting just against those marker pins, and then pin them in place at the top left and right corners of the piece. And now go ahead and repeat that to add the remaining 3 pieces, touching the remaining 3 sets of marker pins. Once you've added all 4 pieces, remove the marker pins and take a look at that center square and adjust anything that needs adjusted. I have some really crooked edges here, so I'm just going to take a moment to straighten them out and make a nice even square at the center. And once you are happy with the center square, we can move on to layer 2. And once you are happy with the center square, remove the pin from the center and scratch those fabric fibers back into place to hide the hole. And now layer 2 is complete and we can move on to layer 3, switching back to fabric number 1 using the 1 1/4 inch squares. Fold them in half with the pattern side facing outward and crease. And this time you will lay the folded edge just against each of the corners from the square outline that you just created in the previous layer. So it's right against that corner, making a straight line parallel with the line on the foam directly above it, and pin in place at the top left and right corners. Repeat those steps to add the next 3 pieces of fabric number 1. Once you've added all 4 pieces, check to make sure that the square outline you just created looks nice and even, and if you need to adjust anything, you can do so now. I'm just going to add a pin to the bottom of this piece to help keep that folded edge where I want it because it was sort of curving a little bit. And once all 4 of those pieces are complete, we can move on to layer 4. In layer 4, we are switching to our squares of fabric number 3. Fold this in half with the pattern side facing outward and crease the top folded edge, and lay these just against the corners of the square outline that you created in the previous layer. And then of course pin in place at the top left and right corners. And you want the top folded edge to create a nice straight line parallel with the line directly above it. Repeat those steps to add the remaining 3 squares of fabric number 3. Once you have added all 4 pieces, your ornament will look something like this, and you want to make sure that that is a nice even square outline. And for the next layer, we are switching back to fabric number 1, this time using 2-inch squares. So again, fold the square in half with the pattern side facing outward, make a nice creased top folded edge, and then lay the piece on the ornament, just touching the corner of the square from the previous layer, and make a straight line parallel with the line directly above it, and then pin in place at the top left and right corners. Repeat those exact same steps to add the next 3 pieces of fabric number 1. Once you have added all 4 pieces, your ornament will look something like this, and of course you want to make sure that the square outline you just created is nice and even, and then we just have one more layer left to add. Now for this one, this is where you can place those marker pins to help you make sure that the corners land right at the centers of each edge. So I'm placing the marker pin into the face of the foam as close to the edge as I can get it, and directly in line with the center point that I marked when I was marking the foam. So I'm just looking for that little mark that I created with the pen and pinning directly along it, right near the edge, and letting those pins stick out about halfway. That way we can help make sure that the corners are centered along each edge of the cube. You're going to fold one of these squares in half with the pattern side facing out and crease. And then when you place this on the ornament, it should line up with the corner of the previous layer and sit just against the marker pins that you just placed. So I can show you a little better once I have one pin there. The folded edge is creating a straight line connecting 2 marker pins, and it just touches the corner from the square we created in the previous layer, and you'll fold the fabric over the edge and pin in place along the side of the cube rather than on the front, because this is the last layer, so we don't want the pins on the front or else we won't be able to cover them up. Repeat those exact same steps to add the next 3 pieces of your final fabric color. Once you have placed all 4 pieces, you can remove the marker pins and make sure that that center square that you just created looks nice and even. And once you are happy with that outline you just created, you are going to work your way around, smoothing the fabric over the edge of the foam and pinning it in place, being careful not to tug the top folded edge out of place. Once you have secured all of the fabric pieces, we just need to create those nice mitered corners. So at each corner of the cube, pinch both layers of fabric and then fold the fabric down to one side. It doesn't matter if you fold to the left or the right, and then pin the folded fabric in place to give a nice finished corner at each of the 4 corners of the foam. Once all 4 corners are pinned in place, you can carefully trim away the extra fabric extending beyond the pins. Remember, this trim line doesn't have to be super pretty. We'll be covering it with a band. We're just trimming away this extra fabric to help reduce bulk. Once that is all trimmed up, side 2 of your ornament is complete, and now we can cover the edges with the bands. The first band we lay down will be your long 3-inch wide strip of fabric. Hold this with the pattern side facing away from you and fold each long raw edge in toward the center. They can overlap a little bit. You don't need to fold it completely in thirds, but you're just creating a folded edge along each long edge of the piece. And then flip this over so that the long raw edge is facing away from you. And now you can decide where you would like the top of your ornament to be. Do you want this to sit as a square with an edge at the top, or do you want it to sit as a diamond with a corner at the top? Here's an example of each. This one is angled, so the bow is at the top corner. This one sits like a square, so I've got edges at the top and bottom. So you can just decide what you prefer. For this one, I am going to orient it like a diamond. So I'm going to have this corner at the top, which means I'm laying the edge of my band a little bit past the corner, and then I'm going to pin it in place. And this band might not cover the raw edges and pins, but that's fine. We are going to add a couple more. My band is sitting just past the corner, keeping it folded with the long raw edges in toward the center. You can wrap this all the way around the ornament, covering that foam as you go. And again, if the pin heads are still showing, that's okay, because we'll add a couple more bands to hide them along the edges. Now, when you reach the top center, whether that be along the edge or along the corner, you are going to add a couple of temporary pins to just hold the band in place while you work. So I'm only pushing these pins in about halfway. They're just holding the band in place while I create a finished edge. Now you want to trim the band so that it only extends about a 1/2 inch past the top center of the ornament. So I'm just going to trim off a little bit of the band here. And now we're going to create a finished edge. So you are going to take that short raw edge of the band and fold it underneath the rest of the piece so that the raw edge is hidden. And when you lay the band down, the folded edge should be right at the top center of the ornament. So that could be right here in the middle of the side, or it could be along the corner like I have mine here. And now we're going to hide the pins. So right at the corner of the band, right where you just folded it under, you're going to tuck a pin underneath the top layer of fabric. So I'm pinning down into the bottom layer, but since I only caught the bottom layer, I can bring the top layer out and around to hide that pin head. So let me show you that again at the back. Here's the folded edge of the band. I'm tucking the pin right into the corner of that fold, but I'm tucking it underneath the top layer and only pinning into the bottom layer, and then bringing the top layer out and around to hide the pin head. Now you can remove the temporary pins, and now we've got the first band added. We're going to add another band along each edge. And for that, you will need your long strip of fabric that is 1.5 inches wide. Again, hold this with the pattern side facing away from you and fold it in thirds lengthwise. You can just work with a couple inches at a time. You're just folding it in thirds, folding each long raw edge inward and creasing. Flip that over so that the long raw edges are facing away from you. And we're going to use the same starting point as the first band, but this time we want one of the long folded edges to sit directly along the edge of the cube. So that's going to give us a nice outline and cover the pins that are left showing. So keeping the long edge of the band in line with the edge of the cube, I'm pinning it in place with 2 pins. And then keeping it folded in thirds, wrap it all the way around the ornament, keeping it in line with the edge of the cube. And when you return to the starting point, we are going to do the exact same hidden pin trick to finish off this little band. So you can use a couple pins temporarily to just hold it in place. Trim the band so that it extends 1/2 inch past the starting point, and this works the same whether you're working on a corner or an edge of the cube. Fold that short raw end underneath the rest of the band so that the folded edge lands right at the top center of the ornament. and then tuck those pins underneath the top layer of fabric, pinning right into the corner of that fold you just created, pushing into the bottom layer and then bringing the top layer out and around. And do that along both edges of the band so that it's nice and secure. And if you have a little corner sticking out like I do here, you can trim it off or use your tucking tool to tuck it away. Go ahead and repeat those exact same steps using a second long skinny strip of fabric to add your final band along the remaining edge of the cube. Once you have added all of the bands to the ornament, all of the fabric pieces are complete, and now we can finish off your infinity cube with the embellishments. And you can embellish your cube however you would like. We have lots of embellishment ideas in the embellishment library on the Ornament Girl website. I'll show you how I'm going to embellish this one, but again, you can really get creative and add any embellishments you would like to this ornament. I'm going to start with my ribbon bows, and for my ribbon bows, I have 3 24-inch pieces of ribbon. So I have 2 red and a green. You could do 3 different colors if you wanted. I'm going to do the gift bow style because it helps me keep my loops nice and even, but if you prefer the loop and pin method, you could do that as well. We have tutorials for the different types of bows on the Ornament Girl website. Take your 24-inch piece of ribbon and fold it in half, placing the ends together, and then cut it at the center so you now have 2 equal pieces of ribbon. Holding those together, fold them in half one more time and cut at the center again so that you now have 4 equal pieces of ribbon. Now take these 4 pieces, and when you fold them in half this time, you are not cutting at the center. You are just going to fold them in half, and since mine is ruffly, it kind of doesn't want to stack up. So you sometimes just have to be patient with your ribbons, especially if you're using textured ones. Fold this stack of 4 ribbons in half, and then pin down through the center point, catching all 4 ribbons on the pin. And then flip this over and spread those 4 ribbons out around the pin on your working surface. And then one by one, you will fold each ribbon end back and onto the pin to create 8 loops. Once you've created all 8 loops, you can flip that pin over and take a look at the adorable little bow you've made, and then pin this into the top center of the ornament, right over the edges of the band. And since we created finished edges for these bands here, you don't have to use bows to cover them up. This is just an optional decoration for this ornament, but we do like to use bows on a lot of our ornaments, so I wanted to show you how I was going to do that for this one. Now I'm going to repeat those exact same steps with my green piece of ribbon to create a second bow. And once you have created that second bow, you can pin it right on top of the first bow that you created to add another layer. And now one more time, I am going to use my third piece of ribbon to create a third bow using the exact same steps. With that third bow, you are again going to pin it right on top of the bows you previously placed. And now you have a beautiful fluffy tiered bow on top of the ornament. I'm not going to add a hanger to mine right now. I'm just going to cover up that center pin. So I'm using a gold sequin pin threaded with a gold bead. followed by a cute little bead cap, and I will pin that right into the top center of the bows. But if you plan on hanging this ornament rather than setting it out on a shelf as a decoration, you can check out the video on our channel for tons of different ornament hanger ideas. We've got lots of different methods you can use to hang those ornaments and add a hanger to them. And now I'm just going to use my gold pins with some gold beads pinned at a few corners of the squares created in the ornament to add a little bit of embellishment to the front and back as well. Once you have added all of your chosen embellishments to both sides of the ornament, your infinity ornament is complete. I hope you really enjoyed making this pattern along with me. It is such a fun way to show off different fabrics and embellishments in this adorable little square-shaped craft. Be sure to subscribe to the Ornament Girl on YouTube for more free ornament patterns and tutorials all year long. Thank you for watching and happy ornamenting!